Hello, and welcome to Auto Be Careful, the place for car safety news and information. I'm Gene, and today we're going to talk about changes to the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards exemption approval process for self driving vehicles and how it's going to affect our roadways. First, a little bit of background. You may have seen self driving cars out on the road or watched videos of them online, and you may have noticed that they look a lot like the same cars you and I can drive today. That's because every car, even self driving robotaxis, have to comply with the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, or FMVSS. These regulations ensure that vehicles on the road today meet a minimum standard for safety, but these standards take a long time to update, and the current rules focus on vehicles that are designed to be driven by humans. That means there are a lot of components manufacturers are required to install on self driving vehicles that don't really make sense. The most obvious examples of these are the vehicle's main controls. If a vehicle is designed to drive itself and never be used by a human driver, it shouldn't need things like a steering wheel, accelerator pedal, or brake pedal. These are components that are designed to only be used by a human driver, so manufacturers shouldn't need to include them in a self driving car. However, because every vehicle that operates on the public roadways needs to comply with the FMVSS, self driving vehicles need to have these unnecessary components installed or they can't be legally operated. This includes many other components as well, including turn signal stalks, gear shift levers, and rearview mirrors. Now, it makes sense that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, would require vehicles to have certain components in order to operate on the roads, but it also makes sense that there are some cases where vehicles may not need to comply with all of these rules. As a result, the NHTSA has a process to allow exemptions. Manufacturers can submit a request for an exemption with a justification, and the NHTSA will review the request and determine if an exemption will be permitted. The NHTSA allows for exemptions for any one of the following four reasons. If complying with the regulation would cause the manufacturer undue economic hardship, if the exemption would make it easier to develop or evaluate new safety features that are at least as safe as current ones, if the exemption would make it easier to develop or evaluate a low emission vehicle without unreasonably compromising the vehicle's safety, or if the applicant would not be able to sell a vehicle that is at least as safe as a non exempt vehicle. Once the request is received, the NHTSA begins to review it and is required to publish a notice of application for public comment. If the request is approved, the manufacturer can begin to operate its vehicles on public roadways without these components installed. It turns out that self driving car manufacturers are having a difficult time with this process because it was designed to be used for traditional vehicles, not self driving ones, and so it seems to go on indefinitely. In all the time that NHTSA has been reviewing these requests, it's only granted one exemption to a manufacturer, and that vehicle was designed to carry only cargo, not humans. It doesn't seem like any of these requests are being denied, simply that they're sitting in review, sometimes for years. As a result, the NHTSA is looking to change that by streamlining the review process for these exemptions. They're trying to solve two main problems with the review process. The first is the amount of back and forth communication needed between the NHTSA and the manufacturer. The NHTSA has determined that once a request is received, they usually need to reach back out to the manufacturer several times in order to gather more information about the request, and this is causing delays. In order to alleviate this issue, the NHTSA will be publishing additional guidance on what it needs to process these requests. This will allow manufacturers to anticipate the needs of the NHTSA and submit all of the required information up front, thereby reducing delays. The other more interesting component that they're focusing on is creating a more dynamic approach to overseeing these reviews rather than the current static one. The current approach requires an unchanging set of conditions throughout the entire review process, and this is causing delays due to the fast paced development of this technology. The NHTSA will be switching to a more flexible approach, which will allow quicker initial reviews of these exemptions with more continued oversight by the agency to ensure the technology is used safely. The NHTSA indicates that these changes will allow reviews to happen in months instead of years. It will be interesting to see if this new approach has an impact on safety or if it creates a lot of new work for NHTSA employees. The end result of these changes should mean that you're likely to see self driving cars without driver controls on the road very soon. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments if you think this is a positive change that's going to take us to the future of self driving vehicles, or if you think this is a negative change that's going to lead to a lot of safety issues. I'd especially love to hear if you'd be willing to get into a self driving taxi with no driver controls installed. So that's a look at upcoming changes to rule exemption approvals for self driving cars. As always, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something, and remember to like and subscribe.